Oh, the 80s, the era of big hair, bright colours, and the heyday of my doppelganger. However, not the era Sex Education was set. Sex Education is a Netflix show which was just released for its second season. The show follows the lives of a diverse group of teenagers and their parents, and all that ensues after two characters, Otis Milburn and Maeve Wiley, set up an underground sex therapy clinic, inspired by Otis's mother's work as a sex therapist. The show aims and arguably achieves at telling the story of young adults awkwardly going through puberty, discovering themselves, discovering each other, and discovering their place in the world. What the show achieves is not just commendable because of the depth and complexity of the characters and the way it balances such pertinent topics with a clever comedy and emotionally stirring sincerity that just sneaks up on you, but it is also commendable because of the strength of its visuals. The show has a vivid design. From the costumes to the set, the colours pop and the patterns persevere to create a strong, easily identifiable aesthetic. It's not hard to notice that the show borrows its design ideas from several decades. It does this in a unique way I haven't really seen before. It doesn't try to jump on the nostalgia bandwagon, which left the station long ago with shows like Stranger Things. The showrunners said they wanted to create a comic book-like world where the reality wasn't akin to ours. It wasn't going for a specific decade or even location. And I think this at first strange mishmash of decades really achieves this. It achieves an ambiguity of a world which allows the story to shine. The world feels familiar with the evocation of these decades and their ideals. However, it's not too familiar that you start to question some of the zaniness of the plot. It manages this balance which fosters a message which in and of itself is one of timelessness. I mean, every teenager gets angsty, has awkward first encounters, and is angered by their parents. So how exactly do they create this world? Let's first start with the costumes. Inspired by the high school nostalgia of John Hughes films, the costumes are reminiscent of the 80s. From Otis's iconic puffer jacket to Eric's constant clash of pattern to Maeve's Madonna-like rebelliousness, the 80s influence is clear, yet not too costumey. The evocation of the 80s through the costuming justifies the overall lack of phones in the show. Although they do acknowledge the use of phones and all the issues they bring with teenagers who are discovering their sexuality, they don't foreground their use, like a show would have to if they were trying for a reality akin to ours. The costumes also evoke a nostalgia of 80s films, bringing with it the teenage angst that John Hughes so often explored. Drawing from the 80s is also an interesting choice for a show which addresses topics like sexual assault and consent. Although maybe unintended, it addresses these topics unlike in those John Hughes films. This results in highlighting the progress we have made, but also it demonstrates that these issues have still persevered through the decades. So the costumes were from the 80s, but what about the set? The set design, especially of the houses of some of the characters, reinforces the motivations and actions of the characters who live in them. The design of Otis's mother's house is reminiscent of the 70s. This works for the character of Dr. Jean Milburn. She is a single parent, a sex therapist, she takes control of her own sexuality and is a woman who isn't easily tied down. All feelings which resonate with the second wave of feminism which happened in the 70s. On the other hand, we have Adam Groff's parents' house, which is done in the style of the 50s. This resonates with Mr. Groff's outdated disapproval of his son's sexuality and the ideals of a dominant working father and a timid stay-at-home wife. In the second season, I really saw how these notions of these characters as reflected in their houses came through and were further explored and extrapolated upon as key parts of the story. I can understand how someone who isn't as invested in investigating all of these specific costume and set choices may think that the show looks like a millennial threw together what they thought the 80s looked like. But I really think that as the story unfolds and as you get to know the characters further, especially in the second season, the choices they made not only make sense, but also show that aesthetics can and should offer more than just a pretty still. I mean, anyone can put on some makeup, do their hair, and go to the thrift store, but it doesn't always mean they should.